Okay, let's unpack this. Today, July 13th, 2025, we're diving deep into something pretty fascinating and definitely timely. We're looking at the first 3 months in office for a newly elected U.S. Representative Randy Fine, a Republican from Florida's 6th District. There's this new comprehensive research report out, and we're going to pull back the curtain on what it says about his early days. Now, this isn't about our opinions. It's really about digging into the data presented in the report, public records, media coverage, finances, what he's actually done legislatively. Our goal here is simple. Pull out the key nuggets of knowledge from this report so you can get quickly up to speed on its findings about his effectiveness and focus.
Yeah, and what's really compelling, I think, is how quickly the report suggests a clear pattern has emerged. We're talking just 3 months in. It gives us this detailed lens, to see if what representative says they'll do actually lines up with what they do legislatively, publicly, right from the start.
Right. So to get a handle on these first few months, the report starts with his background. Makes sense. What foundation did he build before heading to D.C.? So the report details Randall Adam Fine, born 74, so he's 51 now. Harvard grad, BI in government, then an MBA. Before politics. Executive in the casino industry, a consultant too. He moved to Brevard County, Florida back in 2006. That became his political base later on. Okay, so he enters Florida politics in 2016, wins a seat in the Florida House. And the report notes something pretty striking right off the bat. It calls that victory the start of a highly controversial political career characterized by inflammatory rhetoric and ideological battles.
So setting a tone early on, according to the report.
Exactly. And it says that pattern continued throughout his time in the Florida House right up to 2024. The report says he, quote, established a pattern of behavior that would later define his congressional service. Things like provocative statements, attacking critics, focusing on divisive cultural stuff instead of, practical governance. He did chair some committees. Health and Human Services was one. Now, getting to Congress, that happened fast. He was elected to the Florida Senate in November 2024, but didn't stay long. A vacancy popped up in Florida's 6th District because President Trump appointed Congressman Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. Fine got Trump's endorsement, resigned from the state Senate in March 2025, and jumped into the race for Congress.
Quite the whirlwind transition.
Yeah, and the special election itself. The report calls it notably contentious. He was up against Democrat Josh Weil. And get this, Weil apparently outraised Fine by huge margins, something like $10 million for Weil versus just under $1 million for Fine.
Wow, a 10-to-1 difference. That's significant.
It is. But Fine still won the election in April 2025, got 56.7% of the vote, carried all 6 counties in the district. And the report attributes that win mainly to 2 things: the district being strongly Republican and that Trump endorsement. Not so much his fundraising or campaign, it suggests. He was sworn in the very next day, April 2nd.
And it seems, based on the report, that controversial style from his state career just carrying right over to D.C. The report really emphasizes that consistency, which it argues is pretty critical context for understanding what he did next in Congress.
Okay, so let's get into that. What has he actually been doing legislatively in these first roughly 3 months? What does the report show?
Well, as of this month, July 2025, the report says his legislative activity has been limited in scope. And it says it's focused mostly on ideological issues, not so much the practical concerns affecting his constituents back in Florida.
Okay, so limited scope, ideological focus. Does the report give specifics? It does. It highlights a couple of his early initiatives. In June, he introduced what the report calls his signature piece of legislation. It's the Terrorist Designation Bill. It aims to label the Council on American-Islamic Relations a foreign terrorist organization. The report's analysis: it suggests this fits his pattern of targeting Muslim groups, but offers, quote, no direct benefit to his Florida constituents, who might be more worried about things like hurricanes, the economy, infrastructure.
So a national issue focus, not necessarily local impact, according to this analysis.
Right. And also in June, he introduced an anti-anti-Semitism resolution. It condemned an attack, which is standard, but the report points out the language used describing the perpetrator as a Muslim terrorist, emphasizing immigration status. Again, the report frames this as focusing on national cultural battles over local needs. Overall, the data shows he co-sponsored 23 bills and sponsored 8 total pieces of legislation by July. Most co-sponsored bills seem tied to national GOP priorities, not specific FL6 issues.
And what about major votes? Anything stand out there?
Yeah, the report mentions his YS vote on H.R. 1, that big Trump administration package, sometimes called the One Big Beautiful Bill, back in July. Fine apparently called it a historic win for the America First movement. But the report's analysis suggests it's unclear what the specific impact on his district is, and that his public comments were more about supporting Trump than explaining local benefits.
Interesting. And committees. Where did he land?
That's another point the report makes. His committee assignments aren't really prominent in public records. The report finds that concerning, given the district's challenges. It suggests either they're low-profile committees or maybe just not getting much attention from it.
So the overall picture on legislation seems, well, lacking in district focus, according to the report.
That's definitely the thrust of it. The report uses the phrase troubling lack of focus when it comes to issues specific to Florida's 6th district. Hurricane preparedness, tourism, infrastructure, healthcare, economic development, the environment, coastal district stuff. Instead, the report suggests his press releases, his public statements, they're overwhelmingly about national culture wars, Middle East policy, and what it calls inflammatory rhetoric, not practical solutions for the district.
So if you connect those dots, the report's assessment seems pretty clear. It suggests his legislative effectiveness for his constituents is limited. It paints a picture of prioritizing symbolic acts, maybe grabbing headlines with rhetoric, over the quieter behind-the-scenes work needed for effective representation.
Right.
Which, raises that fundamental question. Is he fulfilling his main job of advocating for the district's specific needs? The report seems skeptical.
And that rhetoric you mentioned. The report dedicates a significant section to what it calls a disturbing pattern of controversial public statements. Let's unpack some of those specifics. It highlights a consistent pattern of anti-Muslim rhetoric. The report doesn't mince words. It calls it a moral failing and a misallocation of time and energy.
Strong language from the report.
Very. It cites examples like that post on X, formerly Twitter, just this month, July 2025. It was aimed at Representative Ilhan Omar after she criticized the Israeli PM. Fine wrote, I'm sure it is difficult to see us welcome the killer of so many of your fellow Muslim terrorists. The only shame is that you serve in Congress. The report notes this got bipartisan condemnation. Democratic leaders called it unhinged, racist and Islamophobic, bigoted and disgusting. Timing was also highlighted as troubling, coming after reported assassination plots against Omar. Fine's response to the backlash. According to the report, it was, the Hamas caucus is upset, boo-hoo. Yeah. Then there's the campaign we mentioned earlier to designate CAIR as a terrorist organization in June. The report notes CAIR is generally considered a legitimate civil rights group. CAIR actually responded by labeling Fine himself an anti-Muslim extremist, citing his rhetoric and even compiling a list of examples. Another instance the report brings up is from March, during a public hearing, where Fine apparently referred to a keffiyeh worn by a constituent as a terrorist rag.
That's quite a list already.
And it continues. The report details inflammatory statements about Gaza and Palestinians. In May, on Fox News, he apparently suggested Gaza should be nuked, comparing it to the atomic bombing of Japan. The report calls this advocating genocide and mass civilian casualties. He's also repeatedly stated Gaza must be destroyed, with the report noting a lack of expressed concern for civilians. It even points back to a September 2024 tweet after a Turkish-American activist was killed, where Fine wrote, "Throw rocks, get shot, one less Muslim terrorist." The report describes this as celebrating violence, and it highlights his use of language like calling Palestinians demons that live on Earth, which the report says dehumanizes an entire group.
This is a lot, and the report links this to his past.
Yes, it emphasizes this isn't new. It connects it directly to his time in the Florida legislature. It mentions incidents like allegedly threatening his own synagogue in 2023 over hiring an LGBTQ+ person, ethics violations in 2023 for threatening state funding over personal disputes, even being held in contempt of court in 2024 for making obscene gestures in a virtual hearing, and attacking constituents back in 2017, calling them anti-Semites and Nazis for questioning his legislation.
So, the report documents this long-standing pattern.
Yeah.
And the implication. What does the report say about the impact of all this?
Right, the impact.
On his ability to actually govern, the report suggests it's not just words, right? It argues this leads to real consequences. Things like misallocating his time and energy, damaging relationships needed for, bipartisan work, distracting from local issues, maybe even creating security concerns. It sounds like the report sees a significant cost here.
That's exactly the connection the report makes. It frames it as hindering effective representation.
Okay, so beyond the rhetoric and the national headlines, what about serving the actual people in Florida's 6th district? Constituent services. What does the report find there? Interestingly, it identifies opening district offices as one of the few positive developments. So that's something.
Okay, progress on accessibility then.
Seems like it. He's opened 3 of the 5 planned offices, Palatka and Bellevue, in late May, Eustis in mid-June. A DeLand office is also mentioned. They offer the standard stuff, help with federal agencies, flag requests, DC tours, general questions. But the report adds a significant caveat. There's limited public information about the volume of cases handled, success rates, or specific examples of effective advocacy. So the offices exist, but the impact is unclear from the available data in the report.
So the infrastructure is being set up, but the follow-through or effectiveness isn't well documented yet. According to this report, yes, he has hired staff, regional directors, but then it goes back to analyzing the district's needs versus finds actual focus. And again, it finds that significant disconnect. Florida's 6th is coastal needs related to hurricanes, tourism, infrastructure, healthcare for seniors, the economy, environment.
Yeah.
These are big deals there. Yet the report contends Fine spends considerably more time on social media controversies and national culture war issues than on advocating for those specific district needs.
And press releases, local media.
Same pattern, according to the report. Official press releases focus mainly on national politics, not local project funding, local media coverage, overwhelmingly on his controversial statements. The report also circles back to his relationship with constituents who disagree, citing that 2017 incident calling critics anti-Semites. It notes there are few positive stories about Fine's constituent services in local media and suggests his rhetoric might even make some people hesitant to ask his office for help.
So it's a nuanced picture. The offices are a step, but the report's overall assessment seems to be that the focus of his representation prioritizes his personal ideological battles over constituent service. It's about where the resources go, how relationships are handled, and just, what gets the most attention. That seems to be the core finding here.
Right. Now, let's quickly touch on the money side campaign finance, especially given that huge fundraising gap we talked about earlier. So, 2025 special election, Fine raises just under $1 million and $987K. His opponent, Weil, raises around $10 million. Fine wins despite that 10-to-1 disadvantage.
How does the report explain that win, financially speaking?
It points to a couple of key factors. It notes one notable source of outside support came from the cryptocurrency industry. But primarily, the analysis concludes his victory was largely attributed to President Trump's endorsement and the district's strong Republican lean. That Trump endorsement, the report suggests, was effectively worth millions in free media and voter mobilization.
So less about his own fundraising machine, more about the party lean and the Trump effect.
That's the report's take. It also looks briefly at his past fundraising, like for his 2017 Florida House race. Raised about $82K then, mostly in-state, with support from groups like Disney, healthcare associations, Retail Federation.
And what does the report suggest about the implications of his 2025 funding situation, relying on the endorsement and outside groups?
Well, the report raises a question there. It suggests that this reliance might create incentives to prioritize, national political fights or donor interests over specific district needs. It also points to the limited grassroots fundraising as potentially indicating his support might be more institutional or tied to party loyalty rather than widespread, genuine constituent enthusiasm for his approach.
Interesting connection the report draws there between funding sources and potential priorities.
Yeah. So bringing it all together, what's the report's final verdict? Does it find Randy Fine to be an effective representative in these first 3 months? The report actually lays out criteria first, what makes an effective rep. Things like advocating for the district, building coalitions, good constituent service, professional relationships, balancing national and local stuff, communicating, policy expertise, the basics.
Standard metrics for evaluation. How does Fine measure up against those, according to the analysis?
The assessment is pretty critical. When looking at how he allocates his time and energy, it finds that troubling pattern again. Social media, press releases, media appearances. The report says they focus overwhelmingly on inflammatory rhetoric and national culture war issues rather than district-specific advocacy or legislative accomplishments. It even quantifies it, saying about 90% of news stories about him are focused on his controversies. And his legislative work, as we discussed, is seen as ideological, not practical for the district.
90% is a high number.
It is. The report then uses this concept of a lame duck status, but applies it more broadly, suggesting someone showing characteristics of disengagement from effective representation, even if they're not technically at the end of their term. While Fine isn't a lame duck, the report argues his approach fits this description. Limited legislative wins, focus on symbolic fights, damaged relationships, the national over local focus.
So it's using lame duck metaphorically to describe a perceived lack of effective engagement.
Sort of, yeah. It analyzes his America First platform versus his actions, too. It states that despite campaigning on America First, his actual focus seems prioritized on Middle East issues and anti-Muslim activism over maybe more traditional America First concerns like manufacturing or border security.
An interesting distinction the report makes there between platform and observed priorities.
Then it gets very direct with a section titled Pride and Bigotry versus Constituent Service. The conclusion there is blunt. The evidence strongly suggests that Fine's approach to congressional service prioritizes personal ideological batters and media attention over effective constituent representation. It details what it calls pride-driven behavior, refusing to apologize, escalating conflicts, and bigoted behavior, the anti-Muslim pattern, dehumanizing language, and says this is combined with that limited constituent focus.
That's quite an assessment.
It is. It also touches on Republican voter enthusiasm, suggesting it might be limited, pointing again to the fundraising gap and reliance on Trump's endorsement as signs that support is maybe more about party loyalty than excitement for his specific governing style.
So pulling all these threads together, what's the report's final overall effectiveness rating?
The report concludes there are significant deficiencies. It lists them: limited legislative results for the district, the disproportionate focus on controversy, damaged relationships, mismatched priorities, prioritizing a personal agenda. It does acknowledge some positive elements, like opening the district offices, but the final assessment in the report is pretty stark. It states, Fine appears to be failing in his primary responsibility to effectively represent the interests of Florida's 6th Congressional District, and it concludes by saying he seems to view his position primarily as a platform for advancing his personal ideological agenda, rather than as a responsibility to serve the diverse needs of his constituents.
So the report essentially questions the fundamental understanding of the representative's role itself.
Yeah.
It suggests that when the focus shifts so heavily away from practical local needs, as this report argues it has here, it represents a potential disservice to constituents and maybe even a broader issue of democratic accountability.
Right. So this deep dive, it really just explored the findings laid out in this comprehensive report on Representative Fine's first 3 months. We've presented the evidence as the analysis outlines it, his priorities, statements, overall approach. And it leaves you, the learner, with a question, I think. In today's really polarized landscape, what makes a representative effective? When we look at our elected officials, beyond the headlines, beyond the endorsements, what metrics really tell us if they're serving the practical needs of their communities? Something to think about.